Wondering what you can do with a large stash of collage papers? In this video, I'll show you 3 ways to use the papers I've created so far in my 100 days of mixed media fun. Some of you may have been around when I used this page as an example for upcoming muse packs. Unfortunately, I haven't had time to finish those, but one use of tinted tissue paper is to create a background page or an inspiration page, like reverse coloring. I've started several of these in Dilutions journals. If you're interested in purchasing one to inspire yourself, leave a comment or hop over to Instagram and message me. I'm going to show you how to use your tinted tissue paper for a background, for an inspiration spread, or for a cover. One thing that's important when you're working with the Dilutions journals, since you can't open them and have a page out separate and taped to your work surface, as I often do in my Better with Art videos. So I have parchment paper, which I'll cut in half because we don't need that full size. As always, using my favorite scissors, which will be among the materials I share. If you want to be able to work over the surface, it's more important to use matte medium than otherwise. If you like a glossy surface, that's great. Gloss medium is nice, but this is better if you want to work over the surface with other things. So I do like these Dilutions journals, and they may be what I start recommending. One thing I don't like is they don't lie quite flat, and as mentioned, you can't open them totally up. They also don't have white pages. They're craft paper and not white. So I've decided to cover my cover first. I've never actually covered a cover, only pages, but it works the same. I thought this would work well with the red. Well, this is another option, but the red area, it got folded in on itself as it was made. So it would be an interesting look, but not so much for a cover. Interesting texture. I really like it, and it would work well in something different. I'm wondering if I want to turn it over and do it this way and have the shinier side visible. But you really see more variation in color on this side. And I'm not sure, I haven't used the tissue paper with the paint applied like this to know how translucent it will be. Unfortunately, instead of white, it will show this through. So I'm not too sure how well I'm going to love this. But this particular paper will also allow me to show that if you have a tear, it's okay. I know some people are concerned about the fragility of working with tissue paper. I have a flat brush, my matte medium, this happens to be Liquitex. I use primarily Liquitex Basics acrylic paint, but as far as the mediums go, I've used Golden and Liquitex matte and gloss medium, and I don't see an appreciable difference. I typically use Liquitex Basics paint because they are a better value and a good paint for the value. Okay, so I got out my scissors for the other end, totally sidetracked myself and didn't cut my paper to just slightly larger than the cover. Of course, now my glue is in the way. My adhesive, my medium that I'm using as an adhesive. Oh dear. I cut that way short on there. Well, another demonstration of how forgiving tissue paper can be. On a side note, I had to do a neurocognitive test this morning, and well, I was disturbed by how it went. But one of these days I'll share more about all that. I was going to try to keep that, but I think I'm going to line it up without that now. Well, let's see. So if you've seen any of my tinted tissue paper collage videos, you'll know that you will need medium beneath and on top of your paper. And with my delay and the porosity of the cover, this dried a little, but we can still make it work. Oh, wow. That was totally my fault. All right. So, as I said, tissue paper can be very forgiving. But when something goes sideways, it can go very sideways. And in my typical work on canvas or paper creating some type of image, I don't mind typically having something like that happen in a background or within the layers, because it's layers, and I like the interesting texture it adds and the variation in color. On a cover, not even remotely ideal. However, you will notice that you can't tell that the paper was ripped. And I'll add this bit here. And that won't be noticeable. I'm going to add this because I really like the color and I think it'll, there. Whoopsie. Whoopsie. All right. I wish I'd kept the adhesive, the medium off this a little bit more, but I guess we'll see how that dries also. Again, I haven't worked with one of these covers before, only inner pages. And I totally overworked that with the brush to create that whole I was being a little too rough as I was trying to focus on how to talk at the same time. So now I let this dry. Okay, my cover has dried, and as feared, I have mixed feelings about it with the not white background coming through. I think this would have looked much better on white, and I suppose I could have put down a layer of white gesso. That would have been a good idea if I wanted white. It's not a necessity for the technique to work, unless there's something on your cover you want to cover. All that's left for this is to trim off the excess and, of course, further embellish if that's what you would like to do. One use for tinted tissue paper, as I did in day 1 of my 100 days of mixed media fun, notebook and journal cover. Yes, I think it would be very cool to have this entire cover wrapped in one of my papers, particularly those from last week, but I don't want to have to fight with this at this point. And before I go on to use some of the Galaxy paper for a background or inspiration spread, I'll use more of our day 1 paper. Something else you can do with collage paper, art paper, creative paper of the type I make, tinted tissue paper, is of course collage. I'm not sure totally where I'm going with this, but basically I want to build a flower and use the petals to demonstrate how this technique of tinting tissue paper is and isn't translucent. I'm going to start with some asemic writing, and we will be doing more with that in this series and after this series. This is not my best asemic writing ever, but that's okay. So usually when I work with tinted tissue paper, I don't cut it, I tear it because I like that rougher edge. But I think for these flower petals, I will at least start with cutting so we can see the difference. I'm going to make, let's see what darkest color I have from tissue paper. Well, 100 days of mixed media fun paper. This is the darkest. So I'm going to cut out, tear out. A dark center. For my flower. And this is just basically some intuitive collage making. No particular plan, just play. One thing I will point out about when you use tissue paper and the paper is so saturated with pigment, although acrylic paint and acrylic inks are typically non-reactive, they typically are dry once they're dry. It's a little different when there's so much pigment in the thin paper. As you can see, there's blue around here and there's blue in the matte medium on my paintbrush. I don't know that it's so much reactivated as it is just pulling excess pigment out of the paper. I love these edges, so it's hard for me to not want to maintain the extra color along the edges. And again, as I said, this is intuitive collage making. No particular planning, but doing what feels good, seems good in the moment. And also doing some tearing and some cutting to show you the differences. I probably should have gotten some of the blue out of my brush, but that's okay. I had a bubble there. So one thing you can do to get your papers to go on more smoothly is spray them with water. I had a little too much medium on my page, and as I did with the cover, I overworked some spots and did tear it a little, which again can create its own interesting effect. You can spread some of it back out too with the corner of your brush. So I'm not well demonstrating how sturdy tissue paper can be, because yes, it can also be fussy to work with. sort of a vaguely poppy or peony type flower. Well, that's taking shape. I love to get these deeper areas of color. And as you can see, as it goes on, it is quite translucent. And I need to get a different narrow adhesive brush because this one is getting a little rough for the job. So as you saw last week, medical exam paper does give a different look. For most of what I do typically prefer what the colors do in the tissue paper as opposed to the medical exam paper. But the medical exam paper is a little sturdier. And I'll work with that a bit more later this week. Well, for the video, it'll all be the same to you. At least a long video. Hopefully I'll be getting my reels up, shorts. And yes, I continue to over apply my medium, leading me to overwork my tissue paper. Handy shop towels, always have them in my studio. So do you see how this orange sort of blends in, but also creates some depth of color there? I really like that. So I think I'll add some pink. I'm not liking that straight edge there. I am, however, liking how these lines make an interesting edge to that. And yes, for keeping track, again, that was probably a little excessive with the medium. So as mentioned, I typically don't work with the straight edges when it's not the edge of a paper. But there you go. That's how it looks there. If it wasn't for the extra pigment that collected on the edge of the paper, it wouldn't be as noticeable. But again, part of this is just me doing intuitive collage, but also demonstrating the way different things look when you put them on the paper. I just picked up a piece with that. So I guess that's going to control where I place this one as I have it attached to the back of my other piece. But that's okay. This is not my better with our art journaling, but it is in one of my practice experimental journals. That would have made a cool nasturtium. But it is much, it doesn't carry as much visual weight as the areas with the pink. So I'd like to, I'm hoping that some of this deeper area of orange will show through this pink, and I'll also be able to capitalize on that orange in an area that has less. One thing I love about translucent collage, translucent layer collage, when you're only working with translucent layers or predominantly working with translucent layers, is just the interesting depth and how you can look at something and as you look at it realize how much more is actually there. Do not want that straight line in there. I love how these are already shaped like flower petals. So I'm going to keep the deeper edges. All right, you know what I'll experiment with here? Fussy cutting one of these. Could add a whole new dimension to the way I do this type of collage. But it also slows down the intuitivity. I will make up words when I need to. Another way to do that, I will show you in a moment. Okay, another way to get tissue paper to cut or tear where you would like it to water brush pen, or simply a small brush with water. Make sure the water is coming out. So we want to go around the outside. I'm a little nervous because I've never done this on something where I really wanted to maintain an edge like this. It was more vague, I guess, just a line or whatever. But wet tissue paper tears along the wet edge. So in a way, it's a happy medium between cutting and simple tearing. And that worked quite well. Definitely need something in here to minimize that straight line. I think I might bring in some yellow here. So there's yellow dispersed in other areas. Go for a petal look. A nice little set of petal down here. Oh, I tore off part of my yellow edge. So this should also, as it's yellow going over the magenta pinky color, should also yield an orange tone. Nice. From my perspective, this is still a bit of a boring area. There's a lot of just pink there, not as much variation. So, looking for interesting edges for flower petals. I'm trying to not set my paper in any glue. Matte medium being used as glue. Occasionally have to re-encourage the water brush pen to water. This looks like a butterfly wing. So I typically have used golden satin glazing liquid as my adhesive, but I had gotten going with the matte medium, so I knew it could be gone over on top for the cover and will with the background. I kept using the matte medium, but that will also allow me to more easily work over this if I want to. So if you saw the white edge of that, you can see how with the tissue paper, it just blends in with what's behind it. So as far as edges go, this is my least favorite way to do it. Unless the color continued through the page, I don't like that harsh edge of color. These are both interesting, as is the water pen, but each is a little different. Just wanna do a little bit more over here. All right, for now I'm going to let this sit and go do some laundry. The flower is dry, and you would have multiple options of what you could do with this. You could leave it the way it is. You could use markers, colored pencils, watercolor pencils. One item that I have only tried a few times but would recommend are the Inktense pencils, which are like watercolor pencils in that they're water soluble. The difference is once they dry, they don't react to water again. They're set. They also have more vivid color. As you can see, the depth you can create with layered tissue paper. Also how it gives you some lovely translucence. I'm not fond of the hard edge, but this was more about showing you what's possible. And now on to using some gorgeous tissue paper compared to medical exam paper. Again, I'm using matte medium and have switched back to the slightly larger brush. And a large clip would be handy right now. You want paper well covered. Okay, one thing I forgot to do is spray it, so that could be another comparison. And I think only putting a layer underneath this paper will work. So that's something I haven't done before, is just put down a sheet with adhesive underneath, but I don't know, especially with this shiny from the metallic, I think I'm going to try it this way. And onto, oops, okay, I did tear that a little, didn't notice. Ah! Well, there's a little bit of how the tissue paper can be more fragile. Ooh, I really like that. The problem with these papers is there's so many gorgeous areas on them. I think that's the way I cut it, though. That kind of lines up interestingly. All right, well, I have to pick something and commit. And that gets me more of that interesting purple. And yes, we'll do this again with these wet to see if they go down smoother. I was failing to notice how sort of warped this was, but as I have many more problematic areas that aren't touching the underlying the page, I will go over the top of this one too. It's hard to keep those edges wet enough. And I did get a significant amount of the medium on the parchment paper, but it will release. All right. The top of this paper isn't as porous with the way the metallic spread. I don't think that needs a top layer. So I didn't tear this one at all anywhere. I'll be a little rougher with it, see what happens. Oh, one thing I do see has happened is I have taken off some of the silver though. That's unfortunate. Well, live and learn. Galaxy background pages are dry. As you can see, the tissue paper with this amount of ink and watered down metallic has more of a sheen than the medical exam paper, to which I added the sparkle, which does become much sparklier after it dries. So, what I've learned from this week's experiment thus far is the more surface silver on the medical exam paper will not stay fast when you go over it with a medium. So at this point, I would just do what's kind of like an ink wash on the medical exam paper and leave any metallic embellishment to after it is applied to the surface on which it will be used. Back at the flower. So next I was going to do a full 2-page spread with the Galaxy paper, but wetting it so you can see how it applies differently. It goes down more smoothly. But I saw a reel in which someone used a napkin on an envelope, and I thought that would be fun to try. But this video is already pretty long and it's definitely very late, so that will be part of the next video. Let's take a look back at this week's projects. My 100 days of mixed media fun, numbers 8, 9, and 10. You will get 100 days of mixed media fun, they just won't be 100 days right next to each other. I would love to hear in the comments if you have a favorite from this week or something you would like to see me explore during these 100 days. Be sure to give me a like and subscribe if you haven't yet. And take time to make art, because we're better with art.